As a piece of documentary evidence in a trial like this, the CEO at the center of it, in a letter 7 years ago, saying maybe we should spin off Instagram. How does that play in this environment? What is this environment of antitrust that this trial represents?
We've seen a lot of animosity towards some of America's leading tech companies and this presumption that big is automatically bad. One of the key elements of the FTC's case is it's basically imagining a world that never existed. It's trying to ask for a do-over on an acquisition it approved more than a decade ago. And at the same time, the social media dynamics have been changing. They were changing in 2018 when that letter came about. They were also changing more recently with the emergence of things like TikTok. We have to remember that at the time Meta acquired Instagram and WhatsApp, these were not surefire successes. In fact, there were jokes, particularly about the acquisition of Instagram at the time, kind of why are they doing this? Why are they paying all this money? We don't want to see a world where government enforcers penalize businesses for taking risky chances that turn out to be good bets and turn out to allow more innovation and more benefits for consumers in the market.
This is a trial, and it is contested between the FTC and Meta. But we are, a few months into this new administration in the White House. Prior to the election and after the inauguration of President Trump, many put emphasis on Vice President J.D. Vance's views on big tech and antitrust. How does that context play here in the trial? It seems as if this administration will follow through with the general attitude towards big tech that the prior administration did.
If you look at the history of many of these cases, many of them began in the first Trump administration. Then we saw further gasoline on the fire during the Biden administration, particularly under Chair Lina Khan at the FTC, and this real push towards this big is bad mentality. It seems like so far, both with the remedies proposed in the Google cases as well as with what we're seeing in the Meta case, that this administration seems determined to continue that shift away from the kind of law and economics, consumer welfare-based approach to antitrust to something that makes more presumptions about competitors than consumers, and something that perhaps is using antitrust enforcement for other policy goals. And that should be concerning, because if we lose focus on the consumers whom antitrust was designed to protect, we risk losing the purpose behind antitrust and making this powerful tool more subjective.
Jennifer, why would a breakup of Meta and its family of apps be bad for the consumer?
I think that's what's really at the heart that we need to remember when it comes to this case. You'd lose certain cross-functionality that consumers like, but you also would have companies with fewer resources to engage in research and development technology, to engage in rolling out new features that consumers want in the time that AI is disrupting things, but also fewer resources to do some of the things that consumers have expected around things like young people's online safety. And finally, you might have companies that have to rely more on data and advertisers because they no longer can share those resources. And so they would have to actually shift more towards using their consumer data and more on doing what the advertisers want rather than what their consumers want.
Jennifer, the core of Meta's argument or defense is that the FTC has this narrow definition, but they're misunderstanding the marketplace, that Meta's competition is TikTok and that it is YouTube. How successful do you think that defense will be?
The FTC is seeking a really narrow definition of personal, friends and family social media networks, which is a definition I don't think the average consumer thinks about. And it's something that, if it's successful, could potentially lead to larger disruption in the social media marketplace. Not only does this definition exclude companies like TikTok that are incredibly popular with Gen Z, it also excludes other messaging apps like Signal. It excludes platforms like Snap that have grown in popularity. So it doesn't seem to reflect the experience of the average consumer when it comes to social media and messaging, let alone when it comes to broader conversations around things like advertising or entertainment more generally.
In your research and your review of policy, pending the outcome of this trial, do you expect actions against other big tech names? And if so, who?
We have already seen cases against 4 of America's leading tech companies. Google, which is now in a remedies phase in one of its cases. There are also pending cases against Amazon and Apple, and of course this case against Facebook and Meta. All of these cases really raise concerns about the potential government intervention into what has been a very dynamic ecosystem. Not only could these cases have consequences for consumers, but there's going to be a question as well of what are we missing out on while companies spend their time dealing with enforcement actions instead of innovating and trying to provide better things for consumers. What sort of message does this send to the startup ecosystem?